The wind blew lightly, making the leaves of the trees dance under a late afternoon sky. Sunny Hill Park seemed like an ordinary place, full of children's laughter and colorful toys. Anyone who passed by would never imagine that this place would soon be the scene of one of the most terrifying mysteries ever recorded. The children's laughter was harmonious, a sound that perfectly matched the serene environment. Parents chatted while sitting on nearby benches while watching their children run from one side to the other. An ideal environment until something out of the ordinary began to happen. A man appeared on the horizon, walking slowly through the park. His colorful clothes and bright makeup indicated that he was a clown, but there was something about him that didn't fit. His smile was too big, frozen, as if it weren't real. And his eyes had a coldness that contrasted with the expected joy of his figure. He carried a large bouquet of balloons in his hands. Red, yellow, blue, and green. Balloons that sparkled under the setting sun. The children immediately turned to him, fascinated by the floating balloons and the exotic figure he represented. The clown didn't say anything at first. He just stood there in the center of the park, holding the balloons. It was as if time had stopped for a moment. The children, curious, began to approach, attracted like moths to a flame. The parents watched from afar, many smiling, thinking it was an improvised performance. Then he began to distribute the balloons. Each child who approached received one with an elegant and exaggerated gesture. When the first child took the balloon, something strange happened. The balloon had a name written on it, but it wasn't just any name. It was the name of the child who had grabbed it. The parents, still distracted by their conversations, didn't notice the detail. But the children, innocent and curious, looked at the balloons and laughed, thinking it was just part of the fun. The clown continued to distribute the balloons, one to each child who held out their hand. There was something mesmerizing about the way he acted. He didn't speak, but his exaggerated expressions and precise gestures made the children laugh and feel drawn to him. Some even started running to tell their friends about the magic balloons that knew their names. The sun began to disappear over the horizon, tinting the sky orange and red. The balloons, reflecting the twilight, seemed to almost glow with a life of their own. The clown, now surrounded by a small group of children, raised his arms as if he were about to make a grand revelation. But before that could happen, a sudden silence fell over the park. The children stopped laughing, the balloons stopped swaying, and even the wind seemed to have died down. Something invisible and heavy hung in the air, a feeling that this moment was just the prelude to something much worse. Sunny Hill Park had always been known as a haven for families. Located in a quiet American town, it had everything a child could want. A sturdy wooden swing, a colorful slide, and a vast sandpit where children's imaginations could run wild. The park seemed like the perfect place for carefree afternoons, but that day was not going to be like any other. In the distance, the sound of children playing was beginning to fade. It was as if something was drawing their attention to another part of the park, something that seemed more interesting than the toys themselves. Some parents began to notice their children's unusual behavior, but dismissed their concerns, thinking that perhaps it was just the novelty of a clown appearing unexpectedly. The clown, with his silent presence, became the center of attention. He had something peculiar about his appearance. His makeup, although impeccable, seemed a little too heavy, especially around his eyes, which were surrounded by dark shadows. He moved in a calculated manner, as if each step and gesture had a precise purpose. The children, one by one, approached him. Some held the balloons with excitement, while others hesitated, but eventually gave in to curiosity. Each balloon that the clown handed out had a unique detail. In addition to the child's name, there were small words written in small letters that were difficult to read from a distance. Forever, eternal, no way out. These were the fragments of phrases that, if observed closely, would cause an instant shiver. However, the children were too enchanted to notice. The colorful glow of the balloons seemed more interesting than the words inscribed on them. As the sun sank below the horizon, the balloons began to reflect golden and orange hues, almost as if they had a life of their own. They did not seem to be made of ordinary material. Instead, They had a translucent texture, which made them glow hypnotically in the remaining light of day. A girl named Lily, 7 years old, was the first to notice something strange. She held the red balloon she had received from the clown and, as she turned it between her small hands, she realized that there was something else inside it. A subtle shadow seemed to move inside, as if something were alive inside. She wanted to tell her mother, but was interrupted by the clown himself, who gave her a wide, scary smile. "Do you like surprises, Lily?" he said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was sweet, almost melodious, but it had an unsettling tone that made the girl hesitate. The other children, however, laughed and asked for more balloons, oblivious to what was happening. Meanwhile, the parents were starting to get restless. Some noticed that the park seemed quieter than usual. The conversations that had previously been accompanied by loud laughter from the children were now interrupted by an unusual calm. A mother stood up and called for her son, but he didn't answer. He was standing next to the clown, holding a green balloon. One by one, the balloons began to rise into the sky, carried by the wind. But strangely, none of them strayed very far. They hovered in the same spot, forming a sort of circle above the park. That circle seemed to grow larger and darker as dusk advanced, creating an unsettling shadow that no one could ignore. The children who received the balloons seemed to be under some kind of spell. They stared at them, mesmerized by the bright colors and the light movement in the air. Some parents called out to their children, but it was as if the children were deaf, unable to hear anything other than the clown's strange laughter. The clown, who had been moving slowly and in a controlled manner until then, began to act more disturbingly. He spun in circles, waved his arms in an exaggerated way, and laughed loudly, but his laughter was not cheerful. It was a mixture of mockery and malice, a sound that reverberated in the park, making the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. "More balloons for everyone," he exclaimed in a theatrical tone, pulling more balloons from a bag that seemed to have no end. The balloons appeared as if they had materialized there, magically growing in his hands. The children ran towards him, fascinated, while the parents began to stand up, realizing that something was not right. Suddenly, one of the children let out a scream. An 8-year-old boy named Tommy had grabbed the balloon too tightly, causing it to burst. The sound of the burst was deafening, much louder than expected, and the entire park went silent. Tommy fell to the ground, trembling, his eyes wide. "Tommy, what is it?" his mother shouted, running towards him. But the boy couldn't speak. He just pointed up into the air, where the fragments of the burst balloon were still floating slowly. Inside them, something glowed strangely, as if there was a macabre reflection of something that no one could fully see. The clown approached Tommy and knelt down beside him. "Oh, don't be afraid, my little one. Sometimes surprises are a little intense, but they're made just for you," he whispered with a smile that seemed bigger than ever. Tommy's mother tried to push him away, but felt an inexplicable cold as she approached the clown. Other children began to hold their balloons tighter, giggling nervously as they watched the clown. "Pop yours too!" one of them shouted to his friend, encouraging him to do the same. It was as if their initial fear had disappeared, replaced by a dangerous curiosity. When another balloon popped, the result was even more disturbing. A boy, named Ethan, screamed and dropped his balloon on the ground before it could disintegrate in the air. Dark smoke escaped from the balloon, spreading like a cloud, forming distorted images. It was difficult to tell what exactly was being shown, but it looked like a mix of frightened faces and hands trying to escape from somewhere. At this point, parents began to run, trying to grab their children and take them away from the park. But the children resisted. They did not want to let go of the balloons. Some even held on tighter to their toys, while the clown stood in the center of the park, watching the commotion with an expression of satisfaction. The sky, which had previously been only orange from the sunset, now seemed darker than it should have been. The balloons floating above the park began to move on their own, as if controlled by an invisible force. They formed a perfect circle, with the clown directly below, while his laughter echoed louder and louder, drowning out the screams and cries of the children and parents. The park was now in complete chaos. Parents screamed for their children, trying to pull them away from the clown, but the children seemed trapped in some kind of trance. They stared at the balloons as if they were the most fascinating things in the world, ignoring the desperate screams around them. The circle of balloons in the sky began to slowly spin, emitting a faint, almost imperceptible light. As they spun, the light intensified, dyeing the park with a strange hue, a mix of red and black that made everything seem darker. It was as if night had come early, swallowing the day in a matter of seconds. One of the children, Lily, was the first to speak amidst the growing silence. "Look, there's someone in there," she said, pointing to the balloons in the sky. The others looked, but what they saw made no sense. The shadows moving inside the balloons looked human, but distorted, like reflections in a broken mirror. The clown began to spin in the center of the park, his movements becoming faster and more uncoordinated. He had been laughing loudly, but now his laughter had a metallic, almost mechanical tone. "Don't you want to see the most fun place of all? The place where the laughter never stops?" he shouted, his words echoing as if they were coming from all sides at once. Suddenly, one of the balloons in the sky exploded, but not with an ordinary sound. It was a deep pop, like the roar of thunder, followed by a sound that resembled muffled cries and screams. A black substance dripped from the balloon that seemed to swallow the air around it, slowly falling over the park. The substance hit the ground, and wherever it touched, the environment changed. The sand in the playground turned into a viscous, dark substance, like tar. The toys began to squeak and move on their own, emitting high-pitched, distorted sounds that made parents cover their ears. Ethan, the boy who had popped one of the balloons earlier, began to cry, pointing at the clown. He's not real!" he cried, trying to hide behind his mother. The boy's words seemed to reveal something that no one wanted to believe. The clown was something beyond human, something that shouldn't exist. More balloons began to pop in the sky, one by one, each pop bringing more darkness and disturbing visions. The shadows of the children reflected in the balloons began to take shape on the ground of the park, as if something was trying to get out of there. The parents tried to run, but it was as if the park itself had changed shape, with paths leading to dead ends. The clown then stopped spinning and looked directly at the children with a smile that seemed to split his face in half. "You're already here. There's nowhere to go. Let's play forever," he said, raising his hands. All the remaining balloons quickly descended towards the children, enveloping them in a kind of glowing fog. When the fog disappeared, the park was completely empty. No children, no parents, just absolute silence and the remaining balloons floating slowly in the air. In the center, where the clown had been, there was now only a large black balloon, slowly spinning as it reflected, the full moon rising in the sky. The now deserted Sunny Hill Park looked like a nightmare. The ground, once covered in green grass and sand, was darkened, as if something had sucked all the life out of it. The remaining balloons floated in silence, with a faint, barely perceptible glow. A cold wind blew, carrying a distant sound, something between children's laughter and muffled cries. In the center of the park, the large black balloon continued to spin slowly, reflecting the moonlight in a disturbing way. It was impossible not to look at it. Inside the balloon, distorted images seemed to take shape. Children's faces, screams frozen in expressions of terror, and something deeper, something that could not be described in words. A police officer was the first to arrive after some desperate calls from parents. He stopped at the park's gate, hesitating before entering. The place, which had once been full of life, now seemed like a cursed land. Shining his flashlight on the path, he saw the toys standing motionless, covered in a thin layer of black substance that seemed to pulse as if it had a life of its own. "Hello? Is anyone here?" he called out, his voice echoing in the void. But the only answer was the sound of the wind gently swaying the balloons. He approached the large balloon in the center, unable to look away. Something about it was pulling him, as if it wanted to reveal a secret. When the police officer touched the balloon, a wave of energy passed through him, causing him to immediately recoil. The balloon began to vibrate, and a low, almost buzzing sound filled the air. Suddenly, he heard children's laughter coming from all around him, although there was no one there. More authorities arrived at the scene, along with some parents who had escaped from the park. They were desperate, searching for their children. But all they found were balloons scattered about, each with the name of a child. The balloons, although fragile, could not be popped or destroyed. A paranormal expert was called in after the incident was widely reported on social media. He examined the park and declared that there was an ancient, evil energy at the site, something that was not of this world. He suggested that the clown was not a human being, but rather an entity that fed on innocence and children's laughter. The search for the children continued for weeks, but no trace of them was found. Some families began reporting strange dreams, where they heard their children laughing and saw them chasing balloons in a dark, endless place. These visions only increased their pain and despair. The park was permanently closed and surrounded by high fences. Signs were posted warning of danger and no entry, but this did not stop curious people from trying to enter. Reports of sounds, of laughter and balloons floating in the sky continued to emerge, creating an aura of mystery and fear around the place. Months later, on a full moon night, a group of teenagers defied the legend and invaded the park. They found the black balloon still in the center, intact. One of them, laughing nervously, decided to touch it. The moment he did so, the balloon disintegrated in an explosion of shadows and deafening laughter. The park was swallowed by darkness again, and when the authorities arrived, all they found were more balloons, with new names written on them. The story of Sunny Hill Park quickly became an urban legend. Newspapers, TV shows, and internet channels speculated about what really happened on that fateful night. But no one had any concrete answers. All that remained were the parents' accounts, the mysterious sounds and the balloons with the names of the missing children. Despite the warnings and the surveillance, the park continued to attract curious people. Paranormal researchers, legend hunters, and fearless teenagers tried to discover what lay beyond what was being told. But none of them returned without something disturbing: recurring dreams, unexplained voices on recordings, or even the sight of balloons appearing out of nowhere in their homes. One of the mothers, desperate over the loss of her daughter, decided to return to the park. Her daughter was Lily, the first to notice something strange about the balloons. The woman, carrying the last drawing Lily had made before she disappeared, entered the park at night, guided by grief and a determination that bordered on desperation. As she walked through the gates, the environment seemed colder and darker. The silence was absolute, except for the sound of distant footsteps that were not hers. When she reached the center, she saw a single balloon floating. It was different from the others. It had no name and was completely transparent, like glass. Inside it, there was a vague shadow. The woman called out to her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Lily, if you can hear me, please give me a sign," she cried. The balloon began to vibrate, and for a brief moment, a childish voice echoed. It was Lily, calling out to her mother. "I'm here, but he won't let me out." Before the mother could do anything, the balloon silently exploded, releasing a cloud of smoke that formed the silhouette of an outstretched hand. The mother tried to grab it, but the hand disappeared before she could touch it. The woman fell to her knees, sobbing, as the park seemed to grow darker around her. Meanwhile, the legend of the park continued to grow. People who approached the site claimed to see balloons floating over the gates or hear children's laughter in the distance. Some residents of the city believed that the park had become a portal, a place where innocent souls were trapped, feeding the entity known as the clown. In a last-ditch attempt to prevent further disappearances, authorities decided to demolish the park. But when they arrived to begin work, they found that all the construction equipment had been vandalized. The cement had hardened on its own, the machines were covered in children's handprints, and a single black balloon floated above the site. The workers abandoned the project, and the park was left as it was, surrounded by rusty fences and overgrown. With vegetation, it became a forbidden place, but also a symbol of fear and mystery. Some nights, The city lights would flicker, and residents would report seeing the shadow of a clown at the park's entrance, slowly waving. Years passed, but the cycle continued. Every time someone dared to touch the balloons or enter the park, new disappearances were reported. The clown was never seen again, but his laughter could still be heard on windy nights, mingling with the muffled screams of the children he had taken. And so Sunny Hill Park remained a scar on the city, a place where terror never ended, and evil always found new victims. If this story gave you goosebumps and you want more dark tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell to receive notifications and be prepared to explore the most terrifying mysteries. Your next dose of suspense is just a click away. Let's unravel the secrets of the unknown together.